Collin Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Saturday, December 28th, and we are just 7 days away from the Texas quarterfinal game in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, taking on ASU on Wednesday, January 1st, 2025 at noon in Atlanta, as the number 5 seeded Texas Longhorns take on the 4 seeded Arizona State Sun Devils. I'm Tanner Carlson. That is Jake Jimerson. We are live in person, not over Zoom. So it'll have a little bit different of a vibe. If I say anything too hurtful, he can hit me, physically abuse me like he normally does. But this is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All in Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. And Jake, we are a week away. First of all, Merry Christmas to everybody. Merry Christmas to you. Happy New Year. Any New Year's resolutions, Jake?
I mean, the same one I do every year, to lose weight.
Yeah, I mean,
I've started that one a little early. I have lost some, but you know, that's kind of my main goal of 2025 is get a little bit healthier. So maybe I can keep myself honest with that through the podcast.
It would really help if Texas doesn't put us into a deep, dark depression to where we have to eat our feelings away and drink our feelings away on New Year's, because then you can start off on a good note and be like, okay, maybe I can make a healthy eating choice.
So if they win a national championship, do I have to celebrate and eat a lot of food and drink a lot of booze?
Yes, also true.
So
it's kind of a lose-lose situation.
Lose health-wise, lose-win game-wise.
And you won't lose weight. Lose.
Yeah, it's more of gain, lose, gain, win.
Yeah.
There we go.
Right. It's a very complicated situation. Mine's to like just make healthier eating choices. It's
he's skinny, but don't let it fool you with what he eats.
It's dad bod, but I do eat like crap. So, but anyway, hope you had a great Christmas. We had a great time as well. I hope all of our listeners had a great Christmas. Share your New Year's resolutions. We'll read them and try to be supportive. We'll probably try to tear you down a peg or two if you're not a Texas Longhorn fan. So be aware of that, Georgia fans, if you're trying to invade our comment section again. So anyway, Jake, kind of in a dead period of the transfer portal. We're going to talk a little bit about the transfer portal, what it means for playoff teams, and what it means for certain caliber of playoff teams as well. I think there's a little bit of a discussion we can have there. Collin Simmons was named the Sean Alexander Freshman Player of the Year. We'll get into that conversation along with the other award winners for Texas. We'll wrap things up on the Texas-Clemson game, kind of give a final recap of our thoughts there. And after a couple of watch-throughs, things that we noticed that maybe weren't as good as we thought, maybe things that we weren't as bad as we thought. Probably in terms of everything as good as we thought, we'll probably say the same. I mean, it was a pretty good game for Texas. And then I want to know your thoughts, Jake, on the first round college football playoff drama, if you will, revolving social media and people's public opinions on it, where everybody wants the hottest take as soon as possible. And so if you can come out and say it first, then you can get noticed. And I think that's kind of a trend that we're seeing in college football right now, unfortunately. So anyway, dead period for the portal. The next cycle starts January 1st during the Texas Longhorn game. So obviously they won't get a jump start on it until probably the day after. Jake, how do you see the transfer portal affecting college football playoff teams that are currently in it?
It's a mess, quite frankly. I mean, it's a mess because you got to, for coaches, how do you spend your time? Because like for Texas, you still have to get a couple defensive linemen, but at the same time, you got to be preparing, hopefully, for a semifinal game next, and then hopefully a national championship game. And so that's the goal. And so even during this first portal time, they're trying to get ready for a playoff game. They're trying to get ready for a conference championship, and the portal's ongoing. And then you have like Penn State with their backup for a quarterback. There's a limited amount of starting quarterback positions. Penn State needs him because he's a guy who would come in and be a change of pace guy.
They actually had packages for him.
Yes, I mean, he got in regularly and he would have played in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But for him as a player, and Coach Franklin for Penn State didn't even blame him. He goes, there's only so many starting roles left. He wants to start. He knows that might not happen here next year.
And quarterback, I feel like, is a different position. You could maybe come in late as a wide receiver. Maybe you can come in a little late as a corner or a running back or something along those lines. A punter, a kicker. Sure, you can kind of pick when you want to join a team because learning an offense is a little bit different for a quarterback than those positions. And so I think the pressure is on quarterbacks to make that decision first and foremost. Also, Oklahoma looking for a quarterback. Maybe, there are some higher caliber program teams that are going to go out there first and foremost. Then your secondary teams are going to be the only options you have left.
Yeah, and a guy who's transferring Penn State doesn't want to go start at a Western Carolina. He wants to go start at a team in the Power Four, ideally. And so it's just really messy, both for the coaches and for the players that are on the team that want to transfer, but also probably want to stick it out with their team.
Right.
You have some guys for Texas who have entered the transfer portal, but are still going to be on the team, traveling, might even see the field. Like Justice Finkley typically sees snaps. I don't know how many snaps he played in that Clemson game.
Even
but
special teams, and I don't know how much special teams he plays, but it's possible.
Well, and Finkley's a guy you probably want out there on some snaps against Arizona State because he's more of a stop the run type edge. And that's going to be the first and foremost thing you want to do in that matchup.
And it's not quite like the bowl game feel where you're going to sit players and rest players, or players are going to opt out of playing the game because they want to avoid injury. But you're kind of in that situation with some of your transfer guys who are like, well, if I get injured in this game, my chances of going somewhere else and playing it's going to hinder my chances.
Well, and just to touch real quick on the bowl game thing, because I don't know if we have this lined up to talk about, but I wanted to get your thoughts.
It's probably a topic for tomorrow, probably.
But we'll tease it a little here. Of Deion Sanders coming out and saying that the school is insuring their top players that are going to be going into the draft so that they'll play the bowl game, so that if they get hurt, they will get essentially an insurance payout for whatever lost earnings they would have. Of course, it may not get the full amount, but it gives you some type of reason to play the bowl game where you have some financial security if something happens.
If you're Travis Hunter, you're not going to make that difference of your first overall round pick to wherever he does get drafted.
Right.
But
you get a sum of money that will be substantial. And so it's just, I wonder if schools want to preach bowl games being important and mattering, then to me, they should do that for their top players to incentivize them to play it, because for the players, they're not saying the bowl game doesn't mean anything to them. They're saying, I don't want to risk my entire future to just play one more football game.
What's funny is that the whole bowl game sitting out thing, and this will kind of circle back to the transfer portal, so we'll wrap up that conversation, but it started off, the whole sitting out bowl games was what I remember kind of a Jadeveon Clowney, Christian McCaffrey, those types of guys. And then you can even include a Jalen Smith who opted in to play the bowl game, got hurt. He was supposed to be a top 5 pick, ended up being a second rounder for Dallas. And so it ended up it was your draft stock. So it was your top of the line best players on your team. Now it's not even that. Now it's transfer portal guys. Now it's guys who are looking to opt into playing, your sophomores and juniors that are looking to go play somewhere else that want to avoid an injury. You're looking at Oklahoma. They might have 40 guys dressed out against Navy. I mean, they might have a high school team.
Well, they're going to have a lot of walk-ons. It's scholarship players. I think Venables said today that they were sitting at about 52 scholarship players, which is an NFL roster, which we've talked about how NFL rosters are too small.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you look, and when you have 52 scholarship players, it doesn't mean it's like an NFL roster where you have it balanced between positions. You have 15 wide receivers if you're Tom Herman, and 2 linemen.
So the question I did want to ask you, so we can wrap up this real quickly. When you have 2 teams, and this matchup against Texas, Arizona State is a perfect example of it. Transfer portal period, the window being kind of dead now. It won't reopen until January 1st. If you're Arizona State, you kind of build your roster through the transfer portal, more so than you do Texas, more so than Penn State, more so than Oregon. Those teams can at least build through recruiting and kind of team development. Colorado, Boise State, an Arizona State, an SMU, and Indiana, they build their rosters based on the transfer portal. So if you make college football playoffs, you're hindering next year's team. You're kind of making that sacrifice, in my opinion.
I think it's going to be pretty tough
for Arizona State to make up for lost
I think
time.
It's going to be – I think the Big 12 could be like the NFC East, where you're just not going to see a repeat winner regularly, because it's so hard to – the teams like Texas, Alabama, a lot of these teams, they use the transfer portal to supplement spots in their roster that are weaker, just like Texas is going to do with the defensive line, just like they did with the defensive line this past season, the defensive tackles specifically. And so you supplement spots that are weaker and you try to bolster depth in other areas, whereas Arizona State, they might get half their starters on one side of the ball from the transfer portal that year.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying, with that affecting it when they do get into the playoffs and make a run, you have to imagine it's going to be hard for an Arizona State. It's going to be hard for not necessarily Boise State just because the conference they're in,
Right.
but I think especially in the Big 12, in the ACC, you have the Clemsons who build pretty much through recruiting.
Right.
So you can have some consistency there, but the Big 12 specifically, I think Arizona State's a great example. Arizona State went 10-2 this year. They could turn around and go 5-6, 5-7, 5-6 next year.
Would you be shocked if they weren't bowl eligible next year?
I mean, I'd have to look at their roster to give a full example, but it wouldn't surprise me to see a team like them in the Big 12
at some point in time.
you have that play. I mean, we saw TCU do it.
Yeah.
Just
a couple years ago.
A few years ago, where they went to a national championship game, and then the next year they were either not bowl eligible or barely bowl eligible.
Yeah.
It's one of the two.
Right.
And so it does affect those teams greater than these other teams. For Texas, it's just more of those coaches just don't get a break.
Yeah. It's a year-round 24/7 job. They don't get a vacation time. They don't get an off season. Whereas the players, they'll get an off season, but the coaching staff, it's going to be a year-round.
Yeah, it's not like Oklahoma where you just have to get ready for the Cheez-Its Armed Forces Bowl, and you got plenty of time to get ready. Texas is playing for championships.
Yeah, well, Oklahoma season was done after the Alabama game, and that can be a conversation that we might get into a little bit later in terms of this first-round drama that we're talking about. But Collin Simmons named Sean Alexander Freshman Player of the Year. He is one of three other Texas players that were named award winners. Kelvin Banks won the Outland and the Lombardi, and then Barron won the Thorpe Award. So Collin Simmons obviously has a very bright future, but I'm just looking forward to seeing him matched up with the incoming talent like a Justice Terry and the incoming talent that you're going to be able to stack. That Texas, with the recruiting class that they have coming in, the number one overall class in the country, we could see another Sean Alexander Player of the Year, Freshman Player of the Year next season.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily see that with you got Justice Terry obviously coming in, who's probably going to see early playing time. One of those wide receivers could see early playing time between Jamie French and the other names are escaping me, but a couple of those 5-star receivers. And one stat I'm not sure if you saw on Collin Simmons, but they were comparing his season to Will Anderson's first season, who had an incredible year at Alabama. And Anderson had more tackles and some raw statistics, but sacks. Simmons actually had more. But the thing is, when you look at it and they're super close, Simmons forced more fumbles, had one more sack than Will Anderson, in 250 less snaps.
Oh, wow.
Than Anderson. And so that's why the tackle difference is there.
Yeah.
But if you look at the sacks, you look at the hurries, and you look at all those, it's either even or Simmons is ahead. And Simmons played 250 less snaps.
That's almost what, two or three games less almost total.
And if you think about it, at the start of the year, we were going, well, wow, Simmons looking amazing. They're playing lesser competition. We imagine his production will slow down as the season goes on.
It only increased.
It never slowed down.
Yeah, it only increased if you ask me. I thought his best game came against Georgia in the SEC championship game. One of his best games.
Yeah, A&M, he had a terrific game. Arkansas, he had a try. I mean, he got better. It's so rare for a freshman to get better as the season goes on, because that first year for freshmen is really tough because of the grind of the college game compared to the high school level, the toll it takes on your body.
Well, and then as a defensive lineman, you're going from Texas high school football, which, don't get me wrong, I mean, it's cream of the crop. It's the top of the line. But then you're going into SEC play where these are grown-ass men who are seniors and have been in this system for 4 straight years and developing their body from boy to man. And Collin Simmons is used to playing some guy who's worried about his calculus test coming up. And he has his future is in accounting or a car salesman, later down the line, who probably won't even play at the next level. You're going in 1 year from that to that, and to have the production that he had, I think it's pretty impressive to think about it in those terms.
Yeah. First off, nothing wrong with accounting. You had to throw that one out there. I caught that. And then second off,
Jake was that offensive lineman worrying about his calculus test.
Getting abused by a Collin Simmons. But the other thing about it is, if college football was college basketball, Collin Simmons would be a one and done, and he'd be a first-round draft pick this year.
100%. I would agree with that. Jake, let's go to Texas Clemson. Let's kind of, not a long recap, but things that stood out to you, maybe things that you saw on second, third watches, watching highlights, rewatching game film. Coaches always say it. You're never as good as you think you are. You're never as bad as you played if you had a bad game. Where do you fall? What stood out to you on second, third watches? What are things that you think maybe need to improve on?
I'll just touch on 1 point for each side of the ball to start. For the defense, it was a mix of being as bad as I felt it was, especially the second half, but also Cade Klubnik is really good, and I did not give him enough credit during the week. He is a different level quarterback than Texas has seen all year. I said that after the game, but just watching it again, I was like, man, he
confirmed it.
He made some throws that took not only impressive arm strength and accuracy, but took impressive anticipation and high football IQ. And he's a kid who can play on Sundays. That version of Cade Klubnik can be successful on Sundays.
There's the key word, though, that version of him, because we've seen poorer versions, whether that be against Louisville or whomever during the regular season, even struggling against a poor Pitt team. That version does not make it in the NFL, but the best version of himself is probably a mid-round draft pick in the third, fourth round, I would think.
And could work himself to higher because he still has more college football to play.
Yeah.
And, but he was just, and for him to play his best game in a game where you're in the playoffs, you're going into Austin. He played in high school close to Austin or in Austin. Did you know that?
Are you kidding me?
Some of the players on Texas were teammates.
And he was from Austin and played in the Texas game?
Yeah, and didn't go to Texas.
Man.
Sure, his parents were Aggie legacies, but
I had to actually rewatch the broadcast multiple times to see if they had even mentioned it.
I think they mentioned it just once or twice.
Yeah.
But for him to play one of his best games in that situation against that defense was impressive. Yeah. And then on the offensive end, other than just the running game, Texas can win a national championship with that Quinn Ewers.
Yeah.
And I thought Quinn played pretty well in that SEC title game too. And he played a great first half against A&M. So we're starting to see him. We've seen more really good Quinn Ewers as of late than bad Quinn Ewers. Yeah. And for me, that's a really good sign, especially when you're going against an Arizona State. And then if you go down the road, if they can take care of Arizona State, in Oregon or in Ohio State, they're going to need this version of Quinn Ewers to continue. Yep. But to me, he's showing this is just his level of play right now, because I thought the offense around him really failed him against Georgia upon second and third watch of that game.
Wide receivers, and then we also didn't know the significance of Bond's injury. I think looking back on it, he shouldn't have even played the SEC championship game.
Yeah. And he's a guy, if you can get him back, and him be relatively healthy, that will help open things up for Golden. Because the other thing that stood out to me is Wingo needs to get better at contested catches.
And DeAndre Moore is another name that I feel as though, yes, he is third, fourth option on this offense in terms of catching passes, but I just feel the interception fell on DeAndre Moore, and that was just an out. That was just an out route. That was just a pass to the flats. That was nothing that should have been bobbled and thrown to the defense and completely switched momentum, because within a 2-play period, you lose your right tackle, you lose your running back, and then you throw an interception within a
and lose your center on that play.
And lose your center on that interception play. So you lose half your offensive line, your starting running back, and you cost your team momentum and your quarterback an interception. And so it's like, and yes, that falls on DeAndre Moore in terms of execution, because all he does, if he just catches that, goes down, it's a 3-yard gain. It's a 3-yard gain. We move on. Who knows what happens next? So, but you can't. My point being is you cannot afford to make those plays in the playoffs,
especially when you're going against a team you should beat. That's just giving them life.
That kind of sparked the Clemson slight comeback a little bit. And now, yes, it took the touchdown off the board, but that did spark a little bit of energy on their sideline.
It was just another one of those plays that stopped Texas from getting a blowout. And the weird thing about DeAndre Moore is he went from being one of the more consistent wide receivers to these last 3-4 games of the season. While he has had a lot of really good plays still, he has had at least one really bad drop. If not 2 in every game.
And some of them are touchdowns. Some of them have been in the end zone. And that's one thing that really kind of, you can take a look at what the stats say about red zone efficiency percentages and things like that. But also you kind of overlook when looking at just numbers, you kind of overlook the plays that didn't happen or were negated by drops or bad plays by receivers that Quinn could have had, should have had, or right there, but for whatever reason didn't happen.
Especially that Georgia game.
Yeah.
You go in the games in those games you lose, especially where your offense puts up a ton of yardage, which Texas has had a handful of games this year where they put up a lot of yardage, but not enough points. And a lot of that roots back to penalties and it roots back to drops. And luckily, though, it seems Texas, I've been very impressed this season at when they start having a penalty issue creep up and they focus on it.
They nip it.
They cut them out.
Yeah.
And I think that's not going to be an issue the rest of the season because every game is win or go home. And Sark said they had a real kind of come to Jesus meeting after that Georgia game about the penalties. And clearly it worked.
Yeah.
And that's coaches can only do so much to avoid that. People always go, well, penalties are coaching. Well, to a point, but there's also only so much coaches can do. And at some point, players have to realize how officials are calling things and adjust their play.
And let's also, address the elephant in the room of Georgia has the best defensive line in the country, or a top 3 defensive line in the country. When you're going against that type of pressure and that type of talent, sometimes you're going to hold more. Those players are stronger, bigger, faster. You're just going to grab and happen to be, put in situations you're not accustomed to being put in for this Texas offensive line. You're going to naturally maybe try to get a little bit of a jump before the snap, or you're going to hold a little bit because you're going across a Jalen Walker. Now, I'm not saying it's excusable for a guy like Kelvin Banks or, insert name here, but it does happen against better teams. You're more likely to have some of those penalties. Now, are they more costly? Absolutely. Or is it an excuse? It shouldn't be. It's inexcusable for that to happen. It does naturally happen more against those teams, though.
Yeah, the only excuse is the officials being paid off in the case of the SEC championship because it wasn't getting called the other way.
It wasn't getting called whenever it's obviously the team in red was also holding.
But I do like because Clemson's got big guys up front.
Yeah.
They have solid players.
The defensive tackle is going to be a pretty decent draft pick.
Yeah. I mean, he's a guy that teams that have a defensive line need, like a Dallas Cowboys, I'd be looking at him, in the
second
to third to fourth round, depending where he's getting mocked and where he's being scouted to go.
Right.
He's one of those guys that could probably come in and impact day one. And that's the difference between playing at Clemson and even playing like an Arkansas or even in Arizona State.
Right.
You have more blue chip prospects that are going to be playing on Sundays than you do with some of those other lower SEC teams. And then even the higher teams from a Big 12 or ACC outside of Clemson, typically Florida State, not this year,
and
Florida
Miami.
State. And Miami, who has a lot of talent.
Yeah.
And so that Clemson to me I think Texas would have beat SMU by 50, for instance, whereas we both agreed playing Clemson was probably tougher.
Was Clemson the best team? Well, I think Clemson probably came out the most prepared of any of the other first-round games between Tennessee, Indiana, and SMU.
Well,
the games that lost.
They have good coaches. I mean, they have coaches who have won the national championship.
And that kind of brings me to my next point about the first-round drama. We can kind of just get into that. But as we kind of wrap up our thoughts on Texas Clemson, I thought Clemson came out with a game plan, especially that opening drive. They executed same game plan. And I thought that they played very well because, like you said, they have a coaching staff led by Dabo Swinney who has been in a situation to where they're probably not the favorite. They're in a postseason game. It's a big time moment. As a program, you can feel that Clemson was more prepared than Tennessee, SMU, and Indiana, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, because A, they have better talent than any of those teams other than Tennessee. And then B, they have better coaching than any of those teams. Yeah. You combine those two factors, they were by far the most dangerous of all of those road teams. We had a discussion, and I still stand by it. Clemson should have been seated higher than SMU,
right?
Based off of strength of schedule, because Clemson's
head-to-head.
Well, the head-to-head, and then Clemson, their losses were two of their 3 losses were out of conference to top SEC teams.
Yeah.
Whereas, SMU, they had lost out of conference, but to BYU, which is not a Georgia, not a South Carolina.
By no means. Yeah.
So that to me just shows kind of the flaw with this 12-team format. there was a lot of flaws in the way the seating was done. That was A, in the control of the committee, and then B, also out of the control of the committee.
There are obvious fixes for the playoff, for the 12-team playoff. And I think seeding is the number one overall top of the list. Like, this needs to be fixed. Can it be fixed within the first 2 years? I don't think it can be. But whenever they're up for renewal, can they fix this as soon as possible to kind of right their wrongs? And we'll see next year. This is the first year. Maybe things play out kind of the way they're supposed to play out when it comes to where the seedings are. And you're not getting an Ohio State playing a Tennessee to play the 1 seed. That might not be the case. We don't know what next year is going to look like. You can't predict an SMU. You can't predict an Indiana. You can't predict those types of seasons for these types of teams, like an Arizona State winning the Big 12. You're thinking Utah is going to be a formidable team. They were ranked number 15 or something, a top 15 team to start the season off going into the Big 12. Like, you're thinking that this is going to be a formidable season and a team that's capable of competing with these rosters. So you can't obviously predetermine what the season's going to look like. Maybe next year it's more chalk and expected teams that are ranked high, like a Florida State comes in and mixes things up, and Miami is better, and you get 3 top ACC teams that are threats to compete with the Big Ten and SEC. We don't know that, obviously, but with all that aside, I think saying that the 12-team playoff system completely flopped after 1 round of games is absolutely absurd. And I think, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, is that I think everybody is just on this hot take express of, I have to say the best tweet and get on SportsCenter or get on a talk show or whatever. If I can say something so profound, the fastest, the soonest, and have this take before anybody else does, I'm going to get my 5 seconds of fame. And then it just causes mass chaos throughout social media. And so it's best if you just stay off social media when it comes to college football playoffs at this moment in time anyway. But here's my thing. If the college football playoffs were ranked like last year, where it's the top 4 teams, it would be Oregon the 1 seed, Georgia the 2 seed, Texas the 3 seed, Penn State the 4 seed. That would be your 4-team playoff. Are those teams still in it?
Yes.
Now you're only thinking of at least and then you would have Ohio State blowing out Tennessee in a bowl game, or you'd have Notre Dame blowing out Indiana in a meaningless bowl game, but now their season's done. The only addition, the only pro, in my opinion, is now you're giving teams like a Notre Dame or an Ohio State, who previously did not have an opportunity, to have the chance now to play in a tournament style to where you can play one of those top 4 teams and advance and win and compete for a national championship. That's a pro, in my opinion. Now, yes, you got first-round games that didn't go as according to plan. We had that with the 14 playoff multiple times where they were blowouts and teams weren't prepared.
Also, home field advantage is a big deal. To me, that stood out. You're telling me that as many Tennessee fans as were there, that Ohio State crowd was rocking.
Absolutely.
As soon as they came out and they realized, okay, they're going to play good football, I mean, that crowd was rolling, and that had a large part in it. Texas having the crowd advantage, they were able to jump. All the home teams jumped out. Other than maybe Penn State, who started slow and then got the pick sixes. A lot of that was just bad quarterback play from SMU. But to me, the home field advantage was a huge advantage, and as it should be in college football. You see it all the time in the regular season where you have a big matchup and a blowout happens for the home team. Very rarely. I mean, that's why top 10 road wins are so rare.
Yeah.
I mean, Kirby Smart got his first top 5 road win this year as the head coach of Georgia at Texas, because it's tough to win on the road. And to me, that stood out from that first round. It was wow, this home field advantage is an even bigger deal than I thought.
I also think that, Jake, maybe there wasn't, like, throughout the regular season, I would take away Oregon. There maybe isn't just this elite team where we know head and shoulders it's Clemson, Alabama. That's going to be your national. We didn't have that this year. We haven't had it in a couple of years, really, since NIL has kind of taken part and transfer portal has kind of shaped the offseason. But I think what this playoff system also does that people are really overlooking is this is unquestionably, undoubtedly separating the elite teams who deserve to compete for a national championship from the teams who do not, that are maybe a tier or 2 below. And that's kind of the whole purpose of having a playoff system, is to separate, to put them in a shifter and say, okay, these teams are rising to the top. These are your elite teams. Maybe there's 6 of them. Maybe there's 7 of them. Who knows? Maybe there's 4 of them. And then we're kind of dropping out these other teams. I think that's what it's designed to do. And I think that's exactly what it did in at least the first round. So I think it's kind of playing out the way we're supposed to be seeing it.
And also, to me, it sticks out. The 12-team playoff is not a flop. To me, if you just tweak the obvious thing to tweak in the format, which is automatic bids, fine. However, automatic buys for those bids, not fine.
Yeah.
If you just seed them 1 through 12, you get your field, you seed them 1 through 12 based off what the best teams are, 1 through 12, not Arizona State getting a bye, Boise State getting a bye. We probably have a lot better first round games.
100%.
Because you get a lot.
You'd have an SMU playing Boise State.
Yeah, or Indiana playing Boise State, or however it would turn out.
Yeah.
You get much more even matchups. And yes, at some point down the road, blowouts are going to happen, but that's fine. The March Madness tournament has a ton of blowouts every year.
And we love it. We love it. We're starving for it. I'm hungry for it right now, and it's January, or about to be January. So
exactly.
And here's another thing too, and this will be my last pro in defense of the 12-team playoff, because we've been for the 12-team playoff even since the BCS days. So this is something you and I kind of knew we were going to support going into it. But you can't diminish the spirit of competition within college football by taking away an SMU having a 1-loss season, getting to an ACC championship game. And you can't diminish the fact that these teams like an Arizona State went from bottom to the top, and they were a 10-2 team, won their conference, and then they don't get a chance to compete in a league in which if you can't compete and given a platform to show what you can do, you can do one of two things. You can prove the doubters wrong, or you can prove the doubters right. They at least have a platform now that they are allowed to do that. And that was my whole thing. Obviously, the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma with Oklahoma, Boise State in 2008 or whatever that bowl game was, the Statue of Liberty play, kind of set that off in motion. An undefeated Boise State team beat a Oklahoma team that everyone said Boise State had no business being in that game. They win that game. They finish their season undefeated. Now what do we do? Who's to say they couldn't go on and win the next game and play spoiler? Who's to say they couldn't? Would they have? That's a different conversation. Maybe not. But I think that's where this playoff comes in, is that we are allowing these teams at least the platform to prove the doubters right or prove the doubters wrong. And maybe not this year, maybe next year, we see a team. I'm not so certain that Boise State can't beat Penn State, but I'm just saying I think that we will see at some point in time that this is going to come into fruition of a lower seeded G5 team knocks off a Power 4 team. And
it doesn't mean winning a national championship,
No.
but you'll have the same people who love March Madness and being like, I love all the upsets. What ends up happening to that 15 seed that beats a 2 seed? Whether they go to the Sweet 16, the Elite 8, what ends up happening? Do they ever win the national title? No. The only time you have a double-digit seed win the national title in college basketball is when a UCLA or a North Carolina gets or a UConn gets a 10 seed and makes a run and wins the national title and gets hot because they have the talent to do it. But it doesn't diminish a George Mason run that we still talk about to this day.
Right.
And if a Boise State, that TCU going to national championship, if they could have just made that game look even a smidgen more competitive, they would be talked about in a better light.
If they had lost by 30, it would have been
But
better.
it'll still get talked about forever. Remember when TCU went to national title, and then it'll be followed up. Boy, did they suck in that national title. But you're going to have a Boise State, or you're going to have someone maybe not go to the national championship, but at least get to the semifinal at some point.
And here's the biggest con out of all of this. We get a couple of blowouts in the first round.
Then if you have a problem with
that's the biggest con.
I watched every single college football playoff game, and I had fun watching them.
I thought the environments were incredible. I thought the broadcasts were incredible. I thought the games themselves set up to be entertaining. Now, yes, some of them were duds in terms of the excitement factor of closeness.
The worst game was Ohio State, Tennessee, which was the game that I think everyone thought was going to be the closest.
College game day, everybody was there.
And I was kind of glad that happened just because everyone was going, see, Alabama should they really have been? So you're telling me Tennessee should have been in?
Yeah.
Based off, if you're going to give Indiana and Clemson and
then you need an SMU
that treatment. Well, then you sure better give Tennessee the same treatment because they were the most embarrassing performance out of everyone.
And they were the ones that were supposed to perform the best.
I picked them to win.
We both picked them to win, and they fell flatter than SMU wasn't supposed to win that game. Indiana was not favored or supposed to win that game. Tennessee, on the other hand, they weren't favored in terms of the point spread, but they were supposed to give the best performance of any of those teams. And in my opinion, they laid the biggest egg of those teams because of that. Those
it was 21-0 in the first quarter.
Yeah,
that's way worse than every other game was.
Yeah.
And I mean, they didn't even look competitive in that game.
The moment was way too big. It swallowed them whole. And kudos to Ohio State to kind of ignore the noise that was going into them against Michigan. Now they will not have that as a factor of motivation now. Now I feel like it's completely flipped where people are like, this Ohio State team, they can beat Oregon. If they play like that, they can beat Texas. So now they've got the opposite pressure on them from losing to Michigan. Now it's like, oh, great. Now they've got national title aspirations. Crazy what a week and a half to 2 weeks can do for your team.
And also they really changed. Like, of course they can beat Oregon. They barely lost to them at Oregon the first time in a game that was one of the best games of the whole regular season.
It maybe was the game of the year, to be completely honest.
But that game could end up being a blowout.
Yeah.
And you know, that Texas Arizona State could be close. It could be a blowout. We're going to have another blowout or two in it, but I don't care. I would rather have a 12-team playoff than a 14 playoff. And certainly I've seen some people go, the BCS was fine. No, it wasn't. Because then at one point you're picking, think about all those years of the Colt McCoy, some of the Colt McCoy years where you had Tebow, McCoy, Bradford. You had all these, you had 5 or 6 teams that were all like either undefeated or one loss. And then you have a computer system picking the top 2. For me, you know, those would have been great years to have a 12-team playoff.
So that's kind of where I'm at is like, look, instead of having this playoff committee full of people who I don't think sit and watch college football like you and I do for 12 hours every Saturday for 13 weeks straight, I don't think we should have those people deciding.
No.
We should have a computer that say, here are your top 12 teams. Here are the points in terms of automatic bids that are going to be allowed. But we're going to have a computer rank these teams accordingly. And then you might have a more level playing field in terms of matchups.
Yeah, because you can have the computer formula set to calculate in strength of schedule and actually take that into account for more than certain other things. Because it's just like how people were going, the stupid Twitter discourse of, well, Indiana doesn't have a ranked win. And then people who wanted to support Indiana go, neither does Texas. Well, Texas had the second toughest strength of schedule out of every playoff team. Indiana ranked like 112th in strength of schedule, while Texas was in the mid-20s, high 20s. Yeah. And so it's like, well, not all unranked wins are created equally.
Yeah.
Whenever you're comparing the 27th team in the country to the 110th team in the country.
Exactly. But it's still an unranked win.
Yeah. So the Colorado State win is the same as, you know, the not the Clemson,
Texas
but
A&M.
the Texas A&M win.
Yeah.
No.
Texas A&M win is the same. It equals the same as beating UTSA, according to those who say you're ranked to unranked record. That's essentially what they're saying.
Yeah, and so there's
is mostly A&M fans.
Yes, yeah. My favorite thing is A&M and OU fans going, Texas played a cupcake schedule. You are the cupcake.
You're the cupcakes. Yeah. So hey, that's going to do it for today's episode, Jake. Fun episode on Saturday. We have a little bit different of a schedule release for everybody because of the holiday season, and then the game being played on Wednesday. We thought it was appropriate to start our week on Saturday, treat it like a Tuesday, and move into Wednesday as though it's our Saturday. So these episodes will drop at noon leading up to the game. Then we will give our immediate reaction on Wednesday, New Year's Day, following the quarterfinals game for Texas and Arizona State. So stay tuned. We'll have all your updates for you right here on your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. I'm Tanner Carlson. That is Jake Jimerson. And yes, we are in person. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, hook 'em.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.